Alright mates, how's it going? In today's video, chapter 14 of Illidan by William King. We're actually spending some time with the Betrayer in this one, so let's get... Mr. Stormrage was currently pacing backwards and forwards in his chamber. He'd calmed down a little bit since his conversation with Akama. He'd very nearly killed the Ash-Tongue leader for conspiring with Maiev Shadowsong. The treachery was bad enough, but Maiev, of all bloody people. But Illidan had realised he still needed Akama and his tribe, so he came up with a much better punishment. A punishment that would not only ensure that the Broken would never betray him again, but also would create an opportunity for Akama to deliver Maiev right into Illidan's hands. So he ripped a portion of Akama's soul from his body and bound it to his service. But anyway, Illidan stopped pacing and looked down at his desk. On it was a bunch of maps and charts, and the skull of Gul'dan acting as a paperweight. Illidan had inscribed his maps and charts with runes and patterns, written in demon blood, and these notations were written in a language only he understood, because he made it up himself. These runes mapped the flows of energy between the portals of Outland and their destinations in parts of the Twisting Nether. Not all of the portals had been marked though. Some of the pathways were incomplete, but Illidan knew they must go somewhere, so he concentrated. He was really close to a breakthrough, he could feel it. All the information he needed was here. He just needed to figure it all out, and then he did. Gul'dan, the old bastard, was right. Now that all the info was in front of him, Illidan could finally create the divination spell necessary to search through the portals with unknown destinations and find what he was looking for. But he was going to need to act fast before word leaked and the Nathrezim found out. The Dreadlords were too bloody clever, and if they did find out, all his years of sacrifice and planning would be in vain. So Illidan quickly jotted down the syllables of his great spell, put his pen down, and got to work. A short time later, Illidan had inscribed a duplicate of the patterns on his charts all over the floor, in blood. Not just demon blood, but elf blood, and Draenei blood, and any other blood he could find. And he was walking around the edge of these runes muttering spells of warding and shielding. He could not afford for any prying eyes to witness what he was doing. He then spoke a word of power which caused all the doors of the chamber to slam shut, and they closed so tightly that the room was now completely sealed, which was kinda counterproductive, because now the air in this room would eventually become poisonous due to the energies within. If Illidan remained lost in this ritual too long, he'd die in here, so I guess he just likes working under pressure or something. Illidan then carefully stepped into the centre of the chamber, spread his wings and started to hover. He then spoke another word of power, causing the lanterns around the room to burst into flames, and this in turn caused clouds of hallucinogenic smoke to fill the air, which slithered right into Illidan's nostrils. He took 3 deep breaths and then closed his mouth and held it in, and allowed himself a brief moment to enjoy the sensation of power it gave him. He felt like a god. It was great. But then he invoked the last stages of the spell, and the next thing he knew, his spirit had become completely disassociated from his body. Now, Illidan knew that from this point on, things were real dangerous. His spirit was vulnerable. An almost invisible thread was all that connected him to his body, and if that were to be separated, his spirit would wander forever, lost and unable to return. But whatevs, now was not the time for fear and regret. Ever since Sargeras had taken Illidan's eyes all those years ago, Illidan had been able to see into the Twisting Nether, and for a long time he thought that ability was nothing but a useless curse. Dreadful dreams blasting his sanity. It had been one of the worst torments of his imprisonment. But, as a result of enduring that for so long, Illidan had the ability to send his soul out into the Twisting Nether and the Great Dark beyond. He'd gained terrifying insight into the Burning Legion's plans by doing that, but now he was going to need to stretch himself further than ever before. Illidan took one final look at the great pattern glowing below him. 'Twas both a map and a key that would open the way to where he had to go. He then cast a spell which tore open a gap in the fabric of reality, and off he went. The Twisting Nether can appear entirely differently, depending on who's looking at it. It all depends on your state of mind, really. But for Illidan, it was a black, airless void. He began travelling through this void faster than light. He knew where he was going, and soon enough, he reached the first connecting portal. Through this portal, destruction. Deserts that had once been fields, cities lying in ruins. There was even a Mount Rushmore type thing carved into the shape of Dreadlords. But Illidan continued until he reached yet another portal and emerged onto a different world. Still desolate, but slightly different. A water planet, but the oceans had turned as red as blood, and all the mermaids and whales and seamen were dead. Next portal. Oh, it's deserts again. That's boring. Next portal. On and on, Illidan's spirit flashed, passing from one dead world to another dead world. Probably mostly deserts. He'd known what to expect, and yet it still kind of appalled him. This senseless, monstrous violence. And after a while of drifting between these dead worlds, Illidan started to get a bit anxious. Firstly, he had no idea if it had been 100 seconds since he'd left his body, or 100 years. Maybe his body had already died, and he was now doomed to be like this for eternity. And also, what if he'd miscalculated? What if his map had been wrong, and he was now absolutely lost? But then he passed through yet another portal and came across a world that was completely different to all the other ones. A collection of rocks imbued with potent magic, floating amid the infinite void of the twisting nether. A tiny sun orbited the planet every few minutes, and there were dozens of little moons. And in the distance, Illidan could sense a whole bunch of a very specific sort of demon. Nathrazine. Was this it? Had he finally found Nathrazar? Illidan knew he needed to be absolutely certain that this was the planet he'd been searching for, so he drifted closer to the overwhelming presence of dreadlords that he could sense, despite them being capable of ending him if they discovered he was there. And as he drew closer, he saw all the evidence he needed. Huge palaces filled with Nathrazine, plotting the destruction of worlds and the enslavement of civilizations. It was exactly like Gul'dan's vision. And so, Illidan terminated his spell of spirit walking and slammed right back into his own body with unimaginable speed. Now he could finally take the war to the Burning Legion. It was time to make them pay. All of them. And Illidan was really goddamned excited about it. And we're leaving it there! So we're approaching the halfway point of this story. We'll be back with Maev in the next chapter, but don't worry, she's not just going to ask someone for help and get rejected this time. She is mostly just going to be talking about stuff though. As usual, link in the description if you're interested in buying this book. Also, there's links to my Discord server and my Patreon page too. If you enjoyed this video, like, subscribe, all of that bollocks. And all that's left to say is, thanks for watching, and see ya!